Hi, I'm Chris Heiser from Internet 2 and University of Pennsylvania, and this is Grouper Training End Users Lite UI Permissions Part 2. In Part 1, we talked about showing permissions for a user, showing who has a permission, seeing if a user has a permission, and why a user has a permission. And in this part, we'll talk about assigning a role permission, assigning a user permission, unassigning permissions. The Lite UI is part of the Grouper toolkit, and it's installed by the central administrator, uses the Grouper API to talk to the Grouper registry. And the permission Lite UI is accessed either from a deep link from an application, from the admin UI, or from the Lite UI menu. And just be aware that in every application, permissions are used differently, and you should be familiar with the application and how they use the Grouper permissions before you're assigning and unassigning things. So assigning a role permission. Role permissions, you assign the permission to a role, and then that permission is effectively assigned to all entities that are in that role. Also, if you have role inheritance, then the permission that you assign to the role will be effectively assigned to all roles that inherit permissions from that role, and also effectively assigned to all users in the roles that inherit from that role. So on the Permissions Lite UI screen, you would select the role type permission, select a permission definition if you want to filter the permissions in the combo box, and select a role permission action and assign it. So we have a PTO application, and we can look at a role. PTO admin. We can look at the memberships. There's two entities, Barry Blair and Barry Brooks. And for role permissions, there's one role permission that this role has, PTO reports, so users have that permission as well. And if we look at one of the users, they have PTO reports too, and this checkbox is not checked because it's not an immediate assignment. It's assigned from the role. So now we can make a new assignment to that role. Click on the New Assignment button, and let's say we want to assign PTO login to the role PTO admin. With the action combo box, if you don't know what to put in there, you can just hit the space bar, and if there aren't too many actions, it'll just show the list. For allow and disallow, you probably want to leave it to allow unless you know what you're doing. If you have an inheritance structure and it's either allowed or disallowed at a further away node and you want to either allow or disallow underneath, you can do that, but for now just leave it to allow. And now when I look at permissions for PTO admin, you see that it has login and reports, and if we look for permissions for the users in that role, you see that they now have login and reports, and these are not immediate assignments. So a user permission or an entity permission applies to one entity in the role, in the context of the role, not to all entities. So if you want some users in the role to have different permissions than others, then you would assign a user and entity permission. So on the Permissions Lite UI screen, you would select entity type permissions, select a permission definition. That's optional if you want to filter the permissions, and then select a role, permission, action, and entity. So we will select entity type permissions, and let's see who has PTO audits at this point. Yeah, nobody does. So we can do new assignment, PTO admin, and the user in that role. And then the action, we'll just hit spacebar because we don't remember which actions there are. And again, we'll just keep this to allow and not worry about disallow. And now, if you look at PTO audits, you'll see that Barry Blair, in the context of the role PTO admin, has this permission. But if you look at Barry Brooks, who's also in that role, this user does not have the audit permission. To unassign permissions for role or entity permissions, first view the permissions in the filter and uncheck the assignment box if it's an immediate permission and click submit. Or you can click the red or green icon that shows if the permission is allowed or not. And if the checkbox isn't checked, then it's an inherited permission or an effective permission. So you need to figure out where that permission is immediately assigned, analyze the result, and unassign it where it is direct. So here's an example. Let's say I don't want Barry Brooks to be able to log into PTO admin anymore, but it's not a immediate permission. So I can analyze the result. I see that there's a role assignment on PTO admin for PTO login. So now I can go back to role in PTO admin. So if I wanted to remove this permission from everyone in the role, I could do that here, or I could just remove that user from the role. But if you uncheck that check box and click submit, PTO admin is no longer associated assigned action assign on permission resource PTO login. That's one way to unassign things. The other way is if there's a checkbox there, you could click this icon and that will revoke that one permission. Click on the quiz link in the video description to reinforce your knowledge of this topic. Thank you very much. For further information, see the info sheets, mailing list, wiki, downloads, etc., the demo survey, the online training.